The children of Israel had done it again. They turned their backs on God and walked straight into trouble, as we read in Judges chapter 6, verse 1. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. 7 years. Think about that for a moment. Not 7 days or 7 months, but 7 long years of suffering. The Midianites weren't just ordinary enemies. They came like a storm, bringing the Amalekites and other eastern peoples with them. The book of Judges tells us in chapter 6, verses 2 through 5, "And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. And because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains, and caves and strongholds. And so it was, when Israel had sown, that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites, and the children of the east, even they came up against them. And they encamped against them, and destroyed the increase of the earth, till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. For they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude, for both they and their camels were without number. And they entered into the land to destroy it." Can you imagine living like that? Every time you planted seeds, hoping for food to feed your children, these enemies would sweep in and destroy everything. They were like locusts eating everything in sight. The Israelites couldn't fight back. They were too many, too strong. So God's people ran to the mountains, hiding in caves like animals. They dug holes in the ground, desperate to survive. In this time of fear and hunger, there lived a young man named Gideon. One day, he was doing something strange. Instead of threshing wheat out in the open where the wind could blow away the chaff, he was hiding in a winepress. A winepress was a hole in the ground, meant for crushing grapes, not for separating wheat. But Gideon was terrified. If the Midianites found him with food, they would take everything. While Gideon worked in fear, trying to save just a little grain for his family, something unexpected happened. Judges chapter 6, verses 11 and 12 tell us, "And there came an angel of the Lord, and sat under an oak which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abizrite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress, to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him, and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor." Mighty man of valor? Gideon must have looked around, wondering who this visitor was talking to. Here he was, hiding in a hole, shaking with fear, and this stranger calls him a mighty warrior. It didn't make sense. But God often sees what we can become, not just what we are right now. Gideon's response was honest and bitter. In verse 13 of Judges chapter 6 he says, "O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." You can hear the pain in his words. Where was God? Why had he let this happen? But then something amazing occurred. The visitor didn't get angry at Gideon's questions. Instead, as verse 14 tells us, "And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee?" This wasn't just any messenger. This was the Lord himself. And he was giving Gideon an impossible job: save Israel from an enemy that had crushed them for 7 years. Gideon couldn't believe what he was hearing. Save Israel? Him? In verse 15, his response pours out, "O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. Listen to what Gideon was really saying. My family is nobody special. We're the weakest clan in our whole tribe. And me? I'm the smallest, the youngest, the least important person, even in my own family. How can I possibly do what you're asking? But God's answer was simple and powerful. Verse 16 records, And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. God wasn't asking Gideon to do this alone. The Lord himself would be with him. That changed everything. Gideon still couldn't quite believe this was really happening. So he asked for time to bring an offering. In verses 17 and 18 he says, If now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. Depart not hence, I pray thee, until I come unto thee, and bring forth my present, and set it before thee. The visitor agreed to wait. Gideon hurried home and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread. When he brought them back, something strange happened. Verses 20 and 21 tell us, And the angel of God said unto him, Take the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and lay them upon this rock, and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes. And there rose up fire out of the rock, and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Fire burst from solid rock. The offering disappeared in flames, and suddenly the visitor was gone. Gideon knew then that he had seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Terror filled his heart, as verse 22 and 23 record. And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And the Lord said unto him, Peace be unto thee, fear not, thou shalt not die. That same night, God gave Gideon his first assignment. It wasn't to fight the Midianites yet. It was something closer to home. Verses 25 and 26 of chapter 6 tell us, And it came to pass the same night, that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place, and take the second bullock, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. Gideon's own father had an altar to Baal, a false god. Before Gideon could save Israel, he had to clean up his own house. But this was dangerous. People who destroyed Baal's altars often ended up dead. Still, Gideon obeyed. Verse 27 tells us, Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household, and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. Yes, he was still afraid, so he did it at night. But the important thing is that he did it. Morning came, and the townspeople discovered their precious altar in ruins. They were furious. Verses 28 through 30. Record. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, Who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash hath done this thing. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. The mob wanted blood. They demanded that Joash hand over his son for execution. But something unexpected happened. Joash, who owned the altar, stood up for his son. In verse 31, he speaks, Will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death, whilst it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. Joash was basically saying, if Baal is really a god, let him fight his own battles. Why does he need you to defend him? From that day on, verse 32 tells us, Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he had thrown down his altar. Gideon had a new name, Jerubbaal, meaning, Let Baal fight against him. Time passed, and the Midianites gathered again for another raid. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet to gather fighters. Men from his clan answered the call. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and warriors began to gather. But doubt crept back into Gideon's heart. He needed to be absolutely sure God was really going to use him. So he came up with a test. Verses 36 through 40 of chapter 6 tell the story. And Gideon said unto God, If thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said, behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor. And if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said. And it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow, and thrust the fleece together, and wringed the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. God did exactly what Gideon asked. The fleece was soaking wet, while the ground around it was bone dry. But Gideon still wasn't convinced. He asked God not to be angry, but he needed one more sign. This time he wanted the opposite, dry fleece and wet ground. And Gideon said unto God, Let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry only upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. God was patient with Gideon's fears. He gave him every sign he asked for. The scared young man hiding in the winepress was about to become the warrior God saw in him all along. The Midianites had crossed the Jordan River again. Like a dark cloud, they spread across the valley with their allies from the east. The book of Judges, chapter 6, verse 33, tells us what happened. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together, and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. But this time, something was different in Israel. The Spirit of God moved powerfully upon Gideon. Chapter 6, verse 34 describes it this way. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. When that trumpet sounded, it wasn't just noise. It was a call to war, a sound that hadn't been heard with such power in 7 years. First, Gideon's own clan, the Abiezrites, gathered around him. But God's Spirit wasn't done. Verse 35 continues, And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him. And he sent messengers unto Asher, and unto Zebulun, and unto Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Men poured in from every direction. Farmers left their fields, shepherds left their flocks, and fathers left their families. They came with whatever weapons they could find, old swords, hunting bows, farming tools sharpened for battle. When the counting was done, 32,000 men stood ready to fight. It seemed like a good army, a strong force. Israel finally had numbers on their side. As chapter 7 opens, verse 1 sets the scene. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh, in the valley. The two armies were now in position. The battle seemed ready to begin, but God had other plans. His ways are never our ways. Just when Gideon might have felt confident with his army of 32,000, God spoke words that must have shaken him to his core. Chapter 7 verse 2 records God's surprising message. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand hath saved me. Too many? How could they have too many soldiers when facing an enemy described as countless as locusts? But God knew the human heart. If Israel won with a large army, they would boast about their own strength. They would forget who really saved them. God wanted them to know beyond any doubt that He alone was their deliverer. So God gave Gideon strange instructions. Verse 3 continues, Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. Gideon obeyed and made the announcement. Anyone who was afraid could go home. No shame, no punishment. Just go home if you're scared. What happened next must have made Gideon's heart sink. The Bible tells us, And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. 22,000 men left. More than 2/3 of his army simply walked away. In a few moments, his force had shrunk from 32,000 to just 10,000. The Midianites still looked like an ocean of enemies, and now Gideon had lost most of his army. But God wasn't finished. Even 10,000 was too many. Chapter 7 verse 4 records God's next words. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be, that of whom I say unto thee, This shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, This shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. Gideon led the 10,000 men down to the water. They were probably hot and thirsty, ready for a drink before battle. But this wasn't just about drinking water. God was about to separate the soldiers in the strangest way possible. Verses 5 and 6 explain the test. So he brought down the people unto the water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. Picture the scene. Most of the soldiers dropped to their knees, put their faces down to the water, and drank deeply. They were focused on quenching their thirst, but 300 men drank differently. They stayed on their feet, cupped water in their hands, and brought it to their mouths, lapping it quickly while their eyes stayed watchful. They remained alert even while drinking. God's decision came swift and shocking. Verse 7 delivers the verdict. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place. 300 men. That's all God wanted. From 32,000 to 300. Less than 1% of the original army remained. Verse 8 tells us what happened next. So the people took victuals in their hand and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. Gideon watched as 9,700 more soldiers walked away. Now he stood with just 300 men, looking down at an enemy army that covered the valley floor like sand on a beach. Humanly speaking, this was suicide. 300 against countless thousands? It was impossible. And that was exactly the point. When God won this battle, no one could say it was because of Israel's military might. That night, God knew Gideon needed encouragement. 300 men against an army without number. Even the strongest faith might waver. So God gave Gideon an unusual assignment. Chapter 7, verses 9 through 11, record God's instructions. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host, and thou shalt hear what they say. And afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. God knew Gideon was afraid. Instead of scolding him, God offered him encouragement. Take your servant Phurah, God said, and go listen to what the enemy is saying. So in the darkness, Gideon and Phurah crept down toward the Midianite camp. What they saw was overwhelming. The rest of verse 12 paints the picture. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude. The enemy covered the valley like a thick blanket. Their camels alone were beyond counting. How could 300 men even make a dent in such a force? As Gideon and Phurah crept closer to the enemy tents, they overheard two soldiers talking. One was telling the other about a strange dream he'd just had. Verse 13 records the conversation. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. A barley cake, that was poor man's bread, the cheapest food available. It represented something small and insignificant. But in the dream, this simple barley cake had knocked down a tent completely. The other soldier immediately understood what it meant. Verse 14 gives his interpretation. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian, and all the host. Think about that. Here, in the middle of the enemy camp, Midianite soldiers were having nightmares about Gideon. They were interpreting dreams about their own defeat. God had already put fear in their hearts before the battle even started. The mighty Midianite army was afraid of a farmer with 300 men. When Gideon heard the dream, and its interpretation, something powerful happened inside him. All his doubts melted away, right there, practically in the middle of the enemy camp, surrounded by thousands of soldiers who wanted to destroy Israel. Gideon did something remarkable. Verse 15 tells us, "And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel." He worshipped God right there in the shadow of his enemies. He didn't wait until he was safe. He didn't wait until after the victory. In that dangerous moment, faith exploded in his heart, and he worshipped. Then he hurried back to his 300 men with a new confidence. Verse 15 continues with Gideon's words to his men, "Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian." Notice he didn't say, "will deliver," but "hath delivered," past tense. In Gideon's mind, the battle was already won. God had already given them victory. They just needed to go and claim it. Now came time to prepare for battle. But the weapons Gideon distributed were unlike anything used in warfare before. Chapter 7, verse 16, describes the strange equipment. "And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers." Stop and think about what Gideon was doing. He gave each man 3 things: a trumpet, an empty clay jar, and a torch hidden inside the jar. No swords, no spears, no bows and arrows, just noisemakers, pottery, and fire. These weren't weapons of war, they were objects you'd find in any common household. Verses 17 and 18 record Gideon's battle instructions. "And he said unto them, Look on me and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that, as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with a trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." The plan was simple but bizarre. They would surround the camp in 3 groups of 100 men each. At Gideon's signal, they would blow their trumpets, break their jars to reveal the torches, and shout. That was it. That was the entire battle plan. No military general in history would have approved such a strategy. But this wasn't man's battle to fight. The men held their strange weapons and prepared to move out into the night. 300 men with trumpets and torches were about to face an army as numerous as locusts. In a few hours, the impossible would happen. The night was dark and still. The Midianites had just changed their guards for the middle watch, as told in Judges chapter 7, verse 19. "So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they had but newly set the watch." This timing wasn't random. The middle watch began around 10 o'clock at night. The guards who had just gone off duty would be settling into sleep. The new guards would still be adjusting their eyes to the darkness. It was the perfect moment when the entire camp would be most vulnerable. Gideon had already divided his 300 men into 3 companies of 100 each. Moving silently through the darkness, each group took position around different sides of the vast enemy camp. Remember, this wasn't a small cluster of tents. The Midianite camp stretched across the valley like a sea of shadows. Yet somehow 300 men surrounded it, spacing themselves out in the darkness. Each man gripped his strange weapons tightly. In one hand, a trumpet. In the other, a clay jar with a burning torch hidden inside. The torches had to stay hidden until the exact moment. One light showing too early could ruin everything. These men stood in the darkness, waiting for Gideon's signal, their hearts probably pounding so loud they feared the enemy might hear it. The stage was set, 300 men against countless thousands. Clay jars against swords, trumpets against spears. It looked like madness, but heaven was watching, and God's power was about to shake the valley. Suddenly, Gideon's trumpet pierced the night air. Instantly, 300 trumpets answered back. The sound exploded from every direction around the camp. But that was just the beginning. As verse 19 continues, "And they blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers that were in their hands." The crash of 300 clay jars shattering split the air. In one moment, 300 hidden torches blazed to life, creating a ring of fire around the entire camp. The darkness erupted into chaos, and then came the battle cry, as verse 20 records, "And the 3 companies blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands, to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." Picture what the Midianites saw and heard. Trumpets blaring from every direction, lights suddenly surrounding them completely, voices shouting about the sword of the Lord. To the sleepy, terrified soldiers, it must have seemed like they were surrounded by a massive army. How else could Israel surround their entire camp? In the darkness and confusion, those 300 men might have seemed like thousands. The Israelites kept blowing their trumpets. They held their torches high. They stood their ground and kept shouting. They didn't charge into the camp. They didn't need to. God was about to fight this battle in a way no one expected. What happened next can only be described as supernatural chaos. The Midianite soldiers, jolted from sleep, stumbled out of their tents into a nightmare. Trumpets screaming from every direction, lights blazing all around them, shouts about the Lord's sword echoing through the darkness. The entire camp exploded into panic. Soldiers couldn't tell friend from enemy in the darkness. They didn't know where to run because the trumpets and lights seemed to be everywhere. Some grabbed their swords. Others tried to find their commanders. Many simply ran, crashing into each other in the dark, adding to the confusion. Remember, this wasn't just Midianites in the camp. The Amalekites were there too, and other eastern peoples. Different groups, different languages, different battle cries. In the darkness and terror, they couldn't recognize each other. Every shadow became an enemy. Every shout sounded foreign. Every movement seemed like an attack. The fear that God had already planted in their hearts through the dream now exploded into full terror. These warriors who had terrorized Israel for 7 years were now terrified themselves. The hunters had become the hunted, but they didn't even know what was hunting them. Then came the most incredible part of God's strategy. Verse 22 reveals what happened. "And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host." The Lord himself caused the enemy to attack each other. In the darkness and confusion, Midianite killed Midianite. Amalekite struck down Amalekite. The massive army began destroying itself. Think about it. Gideon's men never even entered the camp. They just stood their ground, blowing trumpets and holding up lights, while the enemy army tore itself apart. The screams of battle filled the valley. But it wasn't a battle between Israel and Midian. It was Midian destroying Midian. Swords that were meant for Israelite blood now dripped with the blood of their own allies. The valley that had been full of enemy soldiers became a valley of confusion and death. The rest of verse 22 tells us what happened next. And the host fled to Bethshittah in Zererath, and to the border of Abel-Meholah unto Tabbath. Those who survived the slaughter didn't try to regroup. They didn't attempt a counterattack. They simply ran. The mighty army that had oppressed Israel for 7 years was now fleeing in absolute terror from 300 men with trumpets. As the enemy fled in chaos, Gideon knew the victory needed to be complete. This wasn't the time to let them escape and regroup. Chapter 7, verse 23 tells us, "And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites." Remember those thousands of soldiers Gideon had sent home. Now he called them back. The men who had been too many for God to use in the initial attack were now perfect for the pursuit. They came running from their tents, grabbing weapons, ready to chase down the fleeing enemy. But Gideon didn't stop there. He knew the Midianites would try to cross the Jordan River to escape back to their homeland. So he sent messengers with urgent instructions. Verses 24 tells us, "And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan." Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan. The men of Ephraim rushed to cut off the escape routes at the Jordan River crossings. Now the fleeing Midianites were trapped between the pursuing Israelites and the river guards. What had started as 300 men with trumpets was now becoming a nationwide pursuit of a broken enemy. The men of Ephraim didn't just guard the river crossings. They caught big fish in their net. Verse 25 records their success. "And they took 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side Jordan." 2 Midianite princes captured and executed. Oreb, whose name meant raven, was killed at a rock that would forever after be called the Rock of Oreb. Zeb, whose name meant wolf, met his end at a winepress that would carry his name through history. These weren't just random soldiers. These were leaders, commanders, princes of Midian. Their deaths sent shockwaves through the fleeing army. The men of Ephraim brought the heads of these princes to Gideon as proof of their victory. It was gruesome, but in ancient warfare, it proved that these enemy leaders would never again threaten Israel. The mighty princes who had led raids against God's people were now dead. But the job wasn't finished. 2 even more important enemies had escaped, the kings of Midian themselves. Chapter 8, verse 4, shows us Gideon's determination. "And Gideon came to Jordan, and passed over, he and the 300 men that were with him, faint, yet pursuing them." Look at those words, faint, yet pursuing. These 300 men were exhausted. They had been up all night. They had witnessed the incredible battle. They had pursued fleeing enemies for miles. Their bodies were crying out for rest. But they kept going. They crossed the Jordan River, leaving the promised land behind, chasing the enemy into their own territory. Gideon asked for bread from the cities of Succoth and Penuel, to feed his exhausted men. But both cities refused, fearing the Midianites might return. Despite this lack of support, Gideon pressed on. Nothing would stop him from completing what God had started. Finally, as chapter 8 verse 10 tells us, he found them. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their hosts with them, about 15,000 men, all that were left of all the hosts of the children of the east, for there fell 120,000 men that drew sword. Think about those numbers. The enemy had started with 135,000 soldiers. Now only 15,000 remained. 120,000 had fallen, most by their own swords in that night of confusion. The two kings thought they were safe in Karkor with their remaining forces. But verse 11 tells us what happened. And Gideon went up by the way of them that dwelt in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and smote the host, for the host was secure. Gideon attacked when they felt safe. The remaining army scattered, and as verse 12 records, and when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them, and took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and discomfited all the host. The kings who had terrorized Israel were now prisoners. Gideon discovered these were the very kings who had killed his own brothers at Mount Tabor. Justice was served. As verses 20 and 21 record, after his young son Jether was too afraid to execute them, then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise thou, and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength." And Gideon arose, and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. The kings of Midian were dead. Their princes were dead. Their army was destroyed. The oppression was over. The victory was so complete, so devastating, that Midian never recovered. Chapter 8, verse 28 tells us the result. Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. 40 years of peace. After 7 years of hiding in caves, 40 years of freedom. After 7 years of starvation, 40 years of eating their own harvests. After 7 years of terror, 40 years of safety. Midian, which had oppressed Israel like locusts devouring the land, never again raised their heads against God's people. The people wanted to make Gideon their king. In chapter 8, verse 22, they begged, "Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son, and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon refused, saying in verse 23, "I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Gideon understood the truth. He hadn't won this battle. The Lord had won it. 300 men don't defeat 135,000 soldiers. Clay jars and trumpets don't win wars. This victory belonged to God alone. The scared farmer who had hidden in a winepress became the judge who brought 40 years of peace to Israel. But he never forgot that the victory came not by military might or human strength. God had taken 300 men with household items and destroyed an army that seemed invincible. The land rested. Children grew up without fear. Families planted and harvested in peace. And everyone remembered the night when God proved that he could save by many or by few, that his power was made perfect in weakness, and that nothing is impossible when the Lord fights for his people. What an incredible journey we've witnessed together, from from a terrified farmer hiding in a winepress to a mighty warrior who defeated an army of 135,000 with just 300 men armed with trumpets and clay jars. Gideon's story isn't just ancient history. It's a powerful reminder that God specializes in using the weak to confound the strong, the few to defeat the many, and the impossible to display His glory. Maybe you're facing your own impossible situation right now. Maybe you feel like Gideon, the least in your family, overwhelmed by circumstances, hiding from problems that seem too big to face. Remember this: the same God who turned Gideon's fear into faith, his weakness into strength, and his 300 men into a victorious army, is the same God who stands with you today. God doesn't need your strength. He doesn't need your numbers. He doesn't need your perfect faith. He just needs your willing heart. When God says, "I will be with you," that changes everything. Your giants may look invincible, but they're nothing compared to the power of the Lord who fights for you. If this story encouraged your faith and strengthened your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss another powerful Bible story that could change your perspective on life's battles. These ancient accounts carry timeless truths that we all need to hear. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in their battles. Maybe a friend facing impossible odds, a family member dealing with fear, or anyone who needs to remember that with God, all things are possible. Your share could be the exact encouragement someone needs today to trust God with their impossible situation. Drop a comment below telling us what part of Gideon's story spoke to your heart the most. Was it his honesty with God? His courage to tear down idols? The way God patiently gave him sign after sign? Or the incredible victory with just 300 men? We read every comment, and your testimony might encourage another viewer. Remember, dear friend, God plus you is always a majority. The same God who gave Gideon victory wants to fight your battles too. You don't need to be strong. You just need to be surrendered. You don't need to be brave. You just need to believe. Together, let's build a community of faith where these powerful Bible stories come alive for a new generation. Subscribe now, share with everyone you know, and let's discover together how God's ancient words speak directly to our modern struggles. Until next time, remember, when the Lord is on your side, victory isn't determined by the size of your army, but by the size of your faith. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video.